John, welcome to the Mindship podcast. How are we doing?
Yeah, really good. Thanks. Really good.
Good. It's been a long time coming. I think we've been talking on and off on LinkedIn for a good few years, so it's
Mm,
good to have you on. Um, as with all my guests, before we get into who you are and kind of what you do, I asked my guests to come up with a log line, a summary of them. What would your log line be?
log line. I think that I am someone who is innately curious. So that's me. And it gets me into trouble because I kind of, I kind of go to places where people like stop and then I go further going, hang on a minute, why is it like this? I know
Okay.
that's a long log line, but yeah.
No, that's a great log line. Innately curious. Cool. Okay, and we'll dig into that in just a second. What I want you to do is I want you to pick a number between 1 and 12. I will then ask you a question, and then a little bit later on, I'll come back to you for the answer to that question. So yeah, go for it, John. Pick a question between a number between 1 and 12.
Okay. 7.
Number 7. Okay, the question you've picked is what's the most difficult thing you've ever had to apologize for? Okay, so we'll come back a little bit later on for the answer to that one. um, but I guess yes. Before we may as well get into it. So, John, maybe tell my listeners who haven't come across you a little bit about your background and yeah, I guess where you've come from.
Well, where I started from really, I think, is when I used to work in a large multinational company. I was involved, I got really interested in change. So I kind of moved into that arena and I thought I was really good. I was making all sorts of new processes and improvements and workshops. And after a few years, I kind of looked back and I thought, well, actually, a lot of this stuff that I'm doing hasn't really achieved much. I go back and look and everyone's still working the same. And the change was a bit painful for people. So I got quite demoralized and I contacted other people that were in a similar role to me. And they said the same thing. And I thought, God, bloody hell, what is going on here? And the organizations I work with, they were in a mess. They weren't working well. I kind of thought that managers knew what they were doing and they were in control. And the reality was that they weren't. They were trying to do things and they were mainly firefighting. And the people doing the work were doing something totally different. And it didn't work. And I was lucky enough to join a consultancy that was using systems thinking. That was a different approach to how organizations work. Now, that was a long time ago. And when I started, there was a point in time when I suddenly realized that they were looking at an organization from a very different perspective. And as I started to work with that, I realized that this was fundamentally different. And this answered a lot of the questions that I had about why I couldn't do what I was doing, why organizations were messy. So I started to become interested in systems thinking, in how to deal with complexity, and in particular, new ways of understanding and managing organizations. And I've been doing that now for over 20 years. So, kind of, that's a whistle stop tour of me. And that's where I am now. And I'm still trying to do that. I'm still learning lots. And I've had some successes and some failures.
Nice. And I think that was kind of where I may have come across you originally. I think there was a crossroads. I kind of come across you. I think maybe it was either through system thinking or service design. I think I can't remember now off the top of my head. And I think I want to needle in a little bit later on around your blending of like services, design for services, and system thinking. But you mentioned you've learned a lot, and there's things which you've got wrong, I guess. Um, and I think a lot of the time when we in school and in work, we get told to kind of show everyone our best work. But I think there's value to asking people, actually, what does your failure CV look like? And I guess if I was to ask you what's the biggest thing on your failure CV, what moment really jumps out for you?
The biggest failure has got to be when I was trying to do all this work and change. I thought a lot of myself, and I kind of look back at that and realized that there was no progress. Now, the word failure to me, I kind of changed that into what didn't work, because when I work with teams, this is what I've learned to do now. I wait until they've made a mistake, and they all look, they all sitting around the table. That didn't work. Oh, we're miserable. Wasn't what we expected. And I'm really happy, right? I'm really happy because I go, great. Why didn't it work? And so we kind of pull it apart. And obviously, it's no one's fault. This is really important. It's not anybody's fault. It's the way that something has happened in the background that has made this happen. So what we do is we sit down and we realize, I help that team to realize that from things not working, we learn more than when things do work.
Mm.
And they get this after a couple of weeks, they get this. And then they're very comfortable then with things that don't work right, because they sit down and they know now how to figure out and learn from that. And that to me is where the greatest learning comes from.
Mm. Nice. It reminds me of I want to say it was a Navy SEAL, I think. But after every operation, they get together and they do a bit of a debrief and they go, why didn't that work? What was successful? What wasn't? And it was that real time feedback. But,
Mm.
the experience, the thing had to happen first before the growth or the opportunity being exposed happens. So I really like that. I really like that. Um, so you're in kind of, you got design happening over here, service design and system thinking and all that good stuff. But I want to take you right back to when you was a child. Um, what did you want to be when someone said to you, John, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was the answer you would give?
Well, I really started in engineering because I like to design and fix things.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So that was me. And I went into engineering and I studied engineering. And I got a bit annoyed because engineering that I wanted to do wasn't like what I studied. It was all mathematical and logical, and I wanted to study the creative side. So it was then that when I started to work in organizations, in engineering organizations, I realized that actually the area I really liked was management, was the way that you got people to work together and to do things. So I very quickly went into that direction rather than engineering.
There's um there's a great friend of mine, Melissa Nova. She wrote a great book. Um, but her background is in engineering. I think she worked for Ford or someone like that. And I think there's something to that mindset, right? That kind of that that mindset of looking at a problem and maybe picking it apart and to really understand what the DNA and the building blocks are of what that is. Um, but I guess when you think back to kind of when you was in school or college or whatever, is that something what gets taught? Is it something you innately have, or is it something your environment helps you develop? What's your take on that?
No, quite the opposite. And at school, I got quite frustrated because the way that I wanted to learn things and the things I wanted to learn wasn't there at school. Basically, had to learn stuff by memory. You had to learn facts. I'm hopeless at learning facts. My memory is terrible. So I didn't do terribly well at school. And it was it's something that I thought that by now would really be fixed and sorted out, because a lot of people around me were thinking the same thing. And now that I understand the world of work and the world of education a lot better, one of the fundamental errors that we're making is the way that we educate children and the way that we develop people into becoming adults. We kind of train them to do good at work, to get good jobs. There's much more about life than that. And that's what we should be focusing on, which is what some countries do focus on, but not here, not where I am.
Mm. Oh, I know that pain. I know that pain. It's when I was in school, so I found out in uni that I have dyslexia and dyspraxia. But throughout the whole school, I had two teachers. I had a really great teacher. We'll call her Mrs. Tucker. I had a really average teacher, and I'm not going to name him. Um, one was in maths, one was in English. And I remember Mrs. Tucker used to give me these great experiences. She created a space for me to explore and be curious. And even though my reading wasn't great when I was younger, she created that space for me to kind of just roll with my imagination. And then I remember The other teacher, who is a maths teacher, we was doing algebra of all things. So think of it, and it's dyslexic and dyspraxic, two things going together, which just don't work.
Mm.
And I remember he stood me up in front of class, and I remember I said, "Oh, I can't understand this algebra stuff." And he turned around and went, "Are you thick?" Like in front of this whole class. And this was years ago, right? Like I'm 40 now, so it was a good way back when. But it's funny how I still remember that, the experience it had on me
Mhm.
and the impact it had on me. But yet, the world which we both work in now is identifying problems and really needling into actually what is causing that. Um, I think when I think about that kind of skill set in school and in education, you know, design thinking, let's just use that. That's very rarely taught in schools, in most schools. Like even just the basic foundations of even just observation and understanding is kind of lacking. And asking great questions. Um, how would you fix it though? How if you had like a one to fix that education, what would be the one or two things you would bring in
Mm.
overnight?
Well, the first thing I'd do is I'd go to a country where they do it a lot better. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't try and reinvent the wheel from scratch because that leads to lots of arguments and all sorts. I'd go to a place where they already do this, and I would observe and I would look and I would get some of that understanding and expertise, and I would bring it back, and I would basically start by uh, taking a school and and trying that approach with a school or a group of schools and seeing what the outcomes are. One of the things that I think's happened in education is that experts have said how we need to educate children. Those children don't have any way to reflect on what it's like for them, and when they've left school, they don't have a way to reflect. It's kind of based on experts that I don't know. They may not be coming from a direction that I'm coming from. So I would move from experts that are academic to people that have experienced it in reality. And I think there's a big difference between the two.
Nice, nice. So I don't know about you, but when I'm talking to friends, I guess outside of our field, if you like, they don't actually understand what I do. Like if I was to go and ask my parents now, they have no idea what I do. Um, but if you was to give a book, one book, to five of your friends to say, "This is what I do," what would that book be? What you'd give for them to
Yeah,
understand it?
it's hoping you wouldn't ask that. Uh, you know what? I don't have a book, and this is odd because I used to rely on books, and a lot of people rely on books, and I find now that the way that we really educate ourselves is much more on social media.
Mm.
So what find now is that people go onto YouTube and go, what is systems thinking? What is complexity? That's where they go. They don't go to a book. Very few people that I know will go to a book and have the times, especially younger people. I tend to find that they don't. So I do have some books, but they tend to be a bit specialist. And I wouldn't suggest that anyone should go to any of those specialist books. But the one in particular that I think made the most impact in me is Beyond Command and Control by John Seddon.
Okay,
Now,
okay,
if someone said, John, what do you do in a book? I would give them that book.
okay. And why is that?
Why is what?
Why would you give that specific book? That one?
Ah, because that was written by the person that employed me in 2002 that had this alternative way of understanding and working with organizations. So that person that had that consultancy actually wrote that book, and it basically incorporates how can we understand organizations differently to the Taylorist model that we have got used to. So just over 100 years ago, Frederick Taylor came along and said, there's a thing called management, and it's a scientific thing, and this is how it should be. So managers manage, people who do the work have job descriptions which are given to them, and each person in an organization does a little bit of work, and all added together, they make things, they do stuff. an input and an output, like a sausage machine. And the manager's job is to control and make sure everybody does the right thing. And if something goes wrong, the manager's job is to go and fix it. Now, that's a model. That's why organizations don't work well.
Mhm.
An alternative way of looking at an organization is that it's made up of human beings that aren't logical. We can't know everything. Managers certainly don't know everything. And people don't need to be controlled or being told what to do all the time. They actually have the ability to understand this themselves. So when you start to look at an organization made up in that way, you start to see that actually the role of a manager, the role of a frontline person, and the way that we create processes and procedures, if that is different, people can work in that organization differently, and managers can manage very differently in a way that's much more successful than the way that I encountered organizations when I first started. That's what that book describes. And interestingly enough, it's based on the way that organizations work in some cases today. Like, for instance, Toyota, the Toyota production system famously works with their own employees first and develops them so that they can work in a particular way, and the managers, and then they get to work to actually work within the organization itself.
So I guess there's a couple of things I want to jump in there then. So there's something around the manager versus leader, which is I think some people use it as, oh, we'll just change the name, but actually it's fundamentally two very different things. Um, and I guess in your experience, have you seen the difference in that? And let me kind of break that down a little bit. So I've biggest team I've had is 40, smallest team I've had is maybe 3. Um, and all of them have come from different like generations. And I use generations. There's a whole debate around Gen Z and millennials and all whatever else. But there's some fundamental differences in what I see in people. And I've noticed that the newer generations maybe seem to want a leader. They want that flexibility. They want the autonomy. They want all the stuff that they can see the impact what we're going to create. And I guess what I found in some of the older generations is they're quite comfortable with giving clear direction and then executing. Is that something you've seen, or is that just a completely opposite thing of what you've observed?
Hmm. I've never looked at it in terms of age before, um, because when I work with people, I that's the thing that I really focus on. Are they able to change? Let's say, let's call it that, or are they stuck in their ways? I think that's what you're saying, isn't it, Danny?
Yeah, exactly right, exactly right.
So the first thing is when I work with people, I make sure that I initially choose the ones that are gonna be open minded, um, curious like me. Um, Now, when I engage with managers and senior managers, I have to make a quick assessment as to whether they are one or the other. And if they don't want to change, there's not much that I can do to help them because they're not going to want to change. A lot of the managers I come up to work with do recognize that they need to change and things need to change. So a lot of the time, it works, and that's really my job. My job is to help those people to see that there are different ways of working and to start to learn about those other ways so that they can actually shift the way that they work.
I think there's something really interesting what you just said there, which is the managers have to want to change. Like
Mm.
ultimately, they need either this beginner's mindset, this open mindset, whatever you want to come up with as a term. Um, but I think in a lot of organisations, and often it's the ones which I have worked in when I've worked in there full time and not been brought in as a consultant. So I'm fixed term contract or as an employee there. And even when you go, these people don't want to change. They don't want to do it. There's no desire there. And if anything, the system set up in place is to reward the old behavior, to reward this old approach. Have you seen it? Is there a way in which people can get around that, right? I think there's something where you bring all these leaders into let's use a workshop, for example, and there's good intent. There's good intent behind it. But people in there often want to be there. But then you go, cool, you get people riled up, you give them these skills, these mindsets, you open their eyes, let's just say. and then they go back out into the big oil tanker, the big complex system. How do you manage that?
They don't go back out to the oil tanker. What happens is that I work with a group of people on day one, and that group of people stay together.
Okay,
And I work with them perhaps every day for a period of months.
interesting.
They do the change. So I'm not imposing any change on anybody. I don't change anything.
Yeah,
So I get a group of people, frontline people from different departments, a manager, a senior manager. They become the team and they stay in that room. It's physically a room, and they redesign and they come up with a new redesigned service, and they're the ones that have done it, and then they bring their colleagues in to that room, into that way of working, and they know how to do that because they're the colleagues. They're
interesting.
not consultants. They're not external people. They're not other managers, and they're not being told they have to change. They're being shown what this team have done. And when you've done that, it works, because what I used to do before is try to change things and try to change people. And there was always resistance to change. And the resistance to change was my fault. It wasn't theirs. So the trick is not to overcome the resistance to change, but is to figure out, if you've got resistance, something is wrong.
Mm.
Something is wrong with the approach, with the method. And that's one of the key aspects of systems thinking. It helps me to look at things from a different perspective. So when things are not working well, I ask myself why. What's going on in the background that's making this not work?
So I guess if I was to apply that into a big bank, which I'm at now, well, financial services, and I guess a lot of the stuff which I do is behavioral experimentation. Okay, and that ultimately is experiment with new behaviors to see what we're like in the flow of work in day to day. Um, and I use the analogy of creating envy, create little fires and create the envy, so everyone goes, what is it they're doing over there? Why are they, etc. But I guess when I think about creating that opportunity for the physical space and creating that kind of moment where the business empowers you to kind of do that. How do you navigate that? Because I guess a lot of the time I go, oh, I hear, oh, we can only get so much time offline, and we can only do this, and we've only got time for that. Is there something around how you pick your? You've talked about you pick your managers, but is there something around how you pick your customer, your business, who you're going to work with?
Well, the first thing I do is kind of work with the senior leaders. So if I'm brought in, what I have to do very quickly is to show them that the problem that they have is not just something that should be fixed, but actually it's a symptom of something that's deeper. So let's say you've got a contact center in a bank, okay? So contact centers are places that I work in frequently. So I might go in because the demand is going up, the average call handling time is getting longer, something's not right with people there. So what I do is I listen to the demands coming in and realize that there are two types of demands. You've got value demands that we should be getting, but we also got maybe 50% demands that the organization has caused themselves. They've caused other people to phone in again and again. As
Mm,
soon as as soon as I show that to a leader, they suddenly realize that half of the demands coming into their contact centers have been caused by their own organization, the way that it's been designed. And they suddenly realize that actually the problem to fix is more to do with the system and the way that the organization is designed, rather than the people in the contact center. So
interesting.
then we have a conversation about, so what's causing all this failure demand that's coming in? And then the solution, the answer to that question is not that difficult. It's very obvious. They're very often the targets, or the fact that people are, I mean, an example is contact centers. Very often people are managed by average call handling time, which means that the shorter the call, the better. So the more calls you do in a day, the better it is. Well, then they come up with all sorts of tricks on how to shorten calls, which basically means that the customer has to call again later or the next day. I mean, it's nuts.
Yeah.
So you and I, we can see that immediately, and we're grinning about it. But as soon as you show that to a leader, they do exactly the same thing, and they go, "How can I? How can this be? How can we've been doing this for years and I've never noticed?" It's because they haven't looked at it from that perspective. As soon as I can do that with them, we then go into a very different discussion, which is much more about the fundamentals of the way that this has been designed. And then they say, "Wow, we've got the potential to actually make a big difference here. How can I do that, John?" I said, "Well, give me a team of people." And then
Yes.
that's the beginning.
Give me a team of people who are, like you say, the right people who are switched on,
That's it.
open-minded, ready for it.
That's it.
Nice. You mentioned a few things there, and I think one of the things I touch on system thinking a little bit in my book, but not in the depths of which your expertise on this. But I guess one of the things which I hear time and time again is the design industry can't come up with what terms mean. Language is a big one. Service design, experience design, design thinking. There's lots and lots of terms, and I guess you've touched on one first, which is system thinking. But I guess for my listeners out there, maybe you could give us a bit of a whistle stop tour around what is system thinking.
So systems thinking is, well, it's the way that we understand things. Okay. So going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, if we look at an organization or a service and we see it as a machine with the managers and the workers and the control, that's like a whole paradigm. It's like a paradigm is a way of seeing something. When you can see that contact center from a different perspective of going, hang on a minute, we're not focusing on the customer, we're focusing on the target, and that's causing this to happen. What happens if we focus on what matters to the customer? And suddenly that sort of what's in their mind has shifted a little bit, not much, just a little bit, enough to get them curious.
Mhm.
Now I keep doing that, and as you keep looking at the organization differently, um, you start to realize that everything in the organization isn't about departments and different things that are disconnected from each other, procedures and all of that. They're all linked together. So you change one thing in one part of the organization and it has effects in a whole load of other things. Now, that's not a very good description of systems thinking, I admit. But in another way, if you can look at an organization like a recipe for brownies, right?
Okay.
Where you can have flour and chocolate bits and a bit of salt and some egg. That's how we see organizations. If we want to change something, we'll add a bit more egg or a bit less egg. On the other hand, a brownie is something fantastic. It's something when you're hungry and you've done a lot of work and you eat it and you taste it. You don't think of the ingredients, you think of the brownie. It's a
Mm.
totally different way of seeing the same things. They're both the same thing, but you see them very, very differently. So, um, systems thinking is a different way of understanding an organization and how to design and how to manage and how to do all the things within it. So you end up with two different organizations. One that is like the traditional way, which is like a machine, and the other way is like a group of human beings that work where we relate differently to each other. We're not fixed in different departments, and we don't have those targets. We work together, and we work to a common purpose as opposed to separately. So that's a rather poor description, but I'm just trying to like start people off at the sort of the basic level of maybe what systems thinking is.
No, I love that analogy of a brownie. I love it. It's the first time I've ever heard it like that. I think that was brilliant. Um, I think when I very first got into system thinking, when I come across it, I remember going, "Oh, this is amazing! Like this is everything what I love about it." And then I realized it isn't something new, and it's been around for a while. Um, And then I kind of did what everyone else does, like the upsides and downsides, and why people adapt it and why adopt it, and why people don't, and the whole kind of tension around that. And I think there's two tensions. What I hear a lot when it comes to system thinking is, if you think about system thinking being right upstream, and a lot of businesses work right downstream, and it feels like it's so big, it can become so much of a monster if you start to look wider and wider and bigger. But nothing really comes out of it because the problem is too big. That tends to be the first one, and then the second one I hear a lot is, well, isn't just system thinking a whole load of maps? At which point I take a deep breath and I talk to myself. But I guess, yeah, maybe kind of help me with them too. I guess there's two, right? There's actually how big is system thinking, and the fact that it just constantly gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I guess.
How it gets bigger and bigger. Um, yeah, what we used to do in organizations is that when there's a problem, we focus on the problem, right? And we like push away all the stuff that we don't need. We focus on that and we go, great, we can fix this. And we can like tweak it, we can do something. And you're right, systems thinking is the opposite. Oh, we've got a problem here. So we've got to stand back and we look at how it's related to everything else. And oh my gosh, everything's related to everything. So, my head's bursting. So what we have to do is we have to kind of just understand how it works.
Mm.
That's what we have to do. Don't be afraid of it. Just understand how things fit together and say, where can I start? You're not going to fix everything, right? Don't try and fix the whole thing. Start somewhere. And as you start somewhere, you start to like change things. Just change a little bit and see what happens. Okay? So the way that we approach something like that is different. We don't try and fix. We just try and engage and adjust it and change it and see what happens. And we just keep doing that. So, and this is particularly true of social things, things out in the community. You don't fix them. You just you work with them. So the way to deal with systems thinking is different to analysis, let's say. You don't analyze so much. The word I use is you synthesize. You stand back and you just understand how it works. And you know what? When you do that, you find that it's rather simple. Just don't get stuck into the detail. Come back out and understand why that team over there are really annoyed and don't want to, don't want to cooperate with the other team. And you realize, oh, in the end, it's just this. Okay.
Mm.
So don't go into the detail. Come out and stand back and see it as a big picture. Try and draw it on one piece of paper. Yeah, that's all. And I do this with my team. Say, okay, you've got to draw this. You've only got this bit of paper to draw it on. They think, what's going on? But I'm forcing them to just look at the high level, the helicopter view, as some people say. Does that help?
Yes, no, that's perfect. And I remember a few years ago, is when I had quite a biggish team, and I was walking through kind of just because of feedback loops and stuff like that, and I was like, use this client and just map this problem. And there was like loads of balancing and reinforcing and whatever loops. And I was like, this is how complex it can get if you give it thinking time. But I think I'm a big fan of sleeves rolled up. Like behavior change happens when you roll your sleeves up. It's a doing sport. It's not a thinking sport. But I also highly value the act of thinking and thinking bigger and more not abstract, but like you say, zooming out, zooming out, zooming out. Um, so that was super helpful. So, and I guess what's your your bounce back when you hear people go, isn't system thinking just a load of maps and a load of templates?
So when people come across systems thinking for the first time, they very often come across the tools that you use in systems thinking. Those are just the tools.
Mhm.
It's not systems thinking. And sure, you can use them, but it's not the same thing. So it's a bit like going into the design realm and going, oh, I'm going to take this project management tool and use it. It doesn't mean you're suddenly going to be able to be a designer or use or be a good project manager. There's a whole load of concepts and So each tool and each method, like the iceberg model, let's say, if you look at that, people use it as a tool, but actually it's basically, it's not a model, it's a representation of an important set of concepts. And because we read books or look at things on social media, we jump at those canvases or tools and we kind of pull them out and go, I'll use this. And you use it, it wasn't any good, No,
Mm.
no. The, the, look at the concepts behind why that was created. And that's what's the important thing. So when I help people understand this, that's what I talk about. I talk about the concepts, and then we start to use the tools.
Mhm. Honestly, you could not have just summed this up perfectly more for me. And I think there's something around all the gear and no idea. Like I hear it a lot, and I think
All the
that
gear and no idea. I like that.
yeah, like there's something around you can have the best toolbox in the whole wide world, and you can use all these cool methods and tools and templates, but ultimately, if you don't understand the value of the thinking behind it and the application, and actually when to needle in or when to go, this isn't working. How can I get people there and do something different? And I think a lot of the time, and this is the book what I wrote was exactly that. The fundamental, the brilliant basics, the foundations. I can everyone there's hundreds of toolboxes books out there. Like and we're all saying the same guff anyway. Like I just feel like there's something around a lot of organizations rush to do the tools and then they skip over these foundations and these concepts and these these fundamentals because they want the shiny shiner. They want the quick fix. And I
I'll give
think
you a really good example. How about this?
go
So earlier on, we were talking about at the end of a project or a piece of work, we do a review and we kind of like sit down together and say what didn't work, okay, and what did work. So let's say you've got a group of people that do that in a room, and they're in a traditional organization, and their manager's in a room.
right.
How open and honest are they actually going to be?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely zero.
Some of them are going to have gripes about another person. They think, well, it was their fault, but I'm not going to say. I can't say that in this room, but I think it was their fault. So I'm going to say things that kind of say, well, it wasn't me. I did a really good job, and we did this, and I don't know why that bit didn't work, and or we'll come up with superficial reasons why it didn't work that were not the real ones. Like the project scope wasn't very well defined, or whatever it is. Or the client didn't give us the right information. This kind of stuff is what I remember I used to hear. And you can have another group of people in a room, and they're open and honest with each other. And they realize that it's not anyone to blame. It's just the way that the team is working right now that's caused the problems. No one is there going, right, I'm going to mess this project up. Everyone is trying their best and they get given instructions or whatever it is. So this second group of people, they don't have to prove anything to each other. And they don't have to, more importantly, they don't have to prove anything to their manager, because the manager realizes that this is about learning. So the
Mm.
second group are there to learn. And because they're there to learn, they explore and they go deep into the systemic reasons, the causes of why these things didn't work, instead of the superficial. So that to me is an example of the difference between a tool and really understanding the concepts behind it. You can't just suddenly move from team one to team two. You have to do a bunch of work with that group of people before they will work differently. So if you're in team one and you go, oh, well, that didn't really work. Well, yeah, because of the concepts and the things behind that team that you can't touch or feel. It's not a physical thing. It's all about the behaviors, the mental models, the fear, Fear is a huge thing in traditional organizations, huge, but it's
Mm.
never discussed. It's never really recognized. We never talk about it. The fear of rejection, the fear of it not being accepted, etc., etc. So,
The fear of consequence. 1 second, John. My dog's just barking at me. 2 seconds. He's just saying he wants to be let in. So I guess, but yeah, and I love the fact there's a fear of consequence as well, right? Um, there's a lot of time around the fact of what do we do if I do make this not risk, but I do the experiment and it doesn't pay off, and the career consequences of it. So I want to touch upon there's a piece in, I think it was on your LinkedIn, around product, service design, and then design by service. Maybe walk us through a little bit about that kind of progression, I guess.
so my background isn't in design. Even though I did study a bit of design in engineering, that was kind of product design. The services have been designed for centuries. We've always been designing services. They don't just suddenly appear, right? We've always been designing them. And the people that have been designing them, the majority of services are designed by managers. The ones that run organizations, they're the ones that change the services. They're the ones that basically say what processes and procedures should be in there. And certainly a few decades ago, there was something called like the quality movement, which was a movement of people that would, a lot of this was based on some of the learnings from Japan, but it was also based on like scientific management about how you go around and you look at problems and you identify them and you approach them from different angles and you fix them. So there was a whole load of tools and techniques around fixing problems and making organizations more efficient. So people used to go around with stopwatches and time people and all that kind of stuff. Now that's the background I came from, mechanistic improvement. So when you've then got and then you've got a discipline called systems thinking, which was a group of people that were mainly academic that came up with all these things, and some of them were consultants as well. So there were also a lot of designers in systems thinking. Akoff was a very famous one, for instance. And then you've got organizations that work differently and design really good services. And then you got service designers,
Okay.
which came as a discipline relatively recently. And they're kind of like distinct and separate from everything else. And I think this is one of the reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing, because I run workshops and webinars and write a lot of stuff, because I'm attempting to recognize that any discipline is too limiting. You can study business, you can study for an MBA and come out and have no idea how to manage and how to run a business, which is quite often what happens. So no discipline should think of themselves as being the ones that do stuff. And a lot of what I see in design thinking is how can we be better designers? And what I'm what I want to say is ask the question, how can we be different designers? How can we look at design that's already been very successful, that's outside of our discipline? How can we look at these many, many organizations that are already working differently and designing fantastic services and have not had a service designer come anywhere near them?
Mm.
That's where we can learn new stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm trying to push the boundaries because we want to get comfortable with ourselves. We want to get comfortable as designers or as systems thinkers, and then we start arguing with each other and we protect our boundaries and our disciplines and we produce research papers, stuff all that. We need to open the boundaries and learn from each other.
This is fascinating. So I find it interesting. So I'm all with you on that mission, John. I'm all with you on that. But I find it interesting when you speak to people, especially designers, certain fit in a box designers, and be like, oh, we need to think, if you put them in a design thinking workshop, like, we need to think bigger and better. And then as soon as you invade on their turf, it's like, these are my Lego, they're your Lego. We don't cross. And it's fascinating. But I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Edinburgh, and it was an innovation conference, right? And I sat around all these people, and I just started talking about kind of biomimicry, and I started talking about speculative design, and it just went all over the heads. But as soon as I dropped in design thinking, it's like, oh yeah, design thinking. I'm like, I'm coming here because I need someone to challenge me. Like, but it's why is that? Why is it we want our customers to stretch, but for us but for designers, they do not want that. They want to stay within their little field, I guess.
So this is an area that I didn't invent this, but other people have invented. How do you help people to see things that they don't see? Yeah. Um, and one of the things I've learned about that is that I can show you something, Danny, on PowerPoint. I can show you presentation, and I can try and convince you of something that I think is wonderful, and I'm trying to get you to also see that it's wonderful. And that's kind of a logical approach. That's sitting in a room,
Mm,
and
mm,
that's looking at something logically, and you're using your logic to understand it. But if I took you, Danny, and I put you in the contact center, and I put a headset on, and you listen to those demands, and you suddenly go, wow, this person has just had this level of service because, and you see the reason for it. And we go back to a room and we discuss that. The conversation is very, very different. So I've struggled with your really important question with other people, and we know that the rational approach doesn't help to push past people's boundaries. What
mm,
helps is for them to see it for themselves. So when I do my workshops now, I don't talk about any of that. I just show them an example. I say, look, this is what the team did. Wow, look at this situation, and everyone goes, yeah, look at that. And then at the end of it, they suddenly realize that they're looking at something and go, yeah, of course that's different. Of course that's not what I do, and of course digital design wouldn't fit that. Great, you've just seen it, but I didn't tell you that. You've seen it for
mm.
yourself.
Nice.
Now that's what I do. That's how I have to work, because it's the only way I think that I know to answer your really, really important question.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's letting them see it. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I find it interesting as well. I think um, people who, and I'm going to say sit on the fringe. Let's just say sit on the fringe. But someone who doesn't fit in a box, I'm a design thinker. Actually, I pull bits from here, and I pull bits from there, and I pull bits from here, and everything should be remixed, rebroken. Potentially, like, we shouldn't rest on our morals to a certain point. Like, one size doesn't fit all. Um, but I find it interesting that a lot of companies want this person, this multidiscipline, whatever you want to call it. And then we get them to join, and then they go, okay, now you need to conform to this. We got you because you're unique and you've got these skill sets and this way of thinking and doing. But now you need to come in on here. And I think there's something around just externally, because you bring in different threads from different places. People can't put you in a box. They can't go, oh, you are X. And for me personally, I've enjoyed that. But it's also bit me in the bum a lot of times because people can't, people like to sit in boxes, put people in boxes. How have you overcome that yourself? Because, our conversation here is you're exactly that. You're pulling things from here and enabling people to see it. Like, how do you sit with that uncomfort of not, of being on the fringe, I guess, on the I guess, pushing them boundaries?
Um, I've never found it a problem.
What an answer. Okay.
I don't. When I started, I used to call it something, right? And then people used to go, okay, well, I'll Google that or I'll whatever. I don't call it anything now. So that explanation I gave you, where the team sit in a room and do different things, they redesign. I kind of say, well, we have to like be in a bubble. We have to be in this protective room where other people can't interfere with what we're doing. So we got this bubble. This organization I'm working with, they call themselves the bubble. That's it.
Nice.
Full stop. They don't know the theory behind what this is. They don't know that some of it is from here and some of it is from systems thinking or complexity. I haven't gone into that level of theory with them. I've just talked about the concepts and I don't name the disciplines that they come from. So I don't have that problem.
That's smart.
And then if someone says, John, what are you doing here? I'm helping this team to redesign their service.
Yes. Do you think a lot of this is, when we think about, I don't know, X design, Y design, there's something around the marketing of it, right? Like there's something, it's easy to market if you say, oh, we're doing design thinking and we're doing this. And I think sometimes it gets in the way of the things what we're actually trying to do. But I guess for a young professional, or maybe not so young, someone coming into, what we do, how do you help someone on that development journey? Because they're coming in, they've maybe heard, I don't know, design thinking, IDO is usually the first one what gets mentioned when it's design thinking and whatever else. Like, how do you help develop that? And this question's coming from, I have a team right now, and I've adopted the team. I haven't picked the team, I've adopted it. And there's a couple of people on my team who are really hungry. Like I love it. I love it. They're super super hungry. But it's like, right, how can we do what you do? I'm like, the stuff what I've been looking at isn't something I can just do overnight. It's stuff I've been thinking about for years. And like, how do you help feed that hunger of these people who are maybe new coming into what you do?
If there are people in the team that want to kind of learn more about what I'm doing, if I tend to work with them every week, there'll be a day every week where I'll say, right, Monday afternoon, we're going to go into some of the concepts behind what we're doing. The people that want to know will turn up, and the people that aren't interested, they just want to get on and do stuff, won't be there. And then we start talking about some of the concepts. And I do that, and they participate. They ask me questions, and those questions will help me go in directions that help them to learn more. So, for instance, some of what I do comes from Toyota. Some organizations I work for, I've mentioned that, but they don't count less. But then there are maybe a couple of people in the team that go, oh, I want to know more about that. Okay. So for a couple of hours, we will talk about some specifics about this is what Toyota do. And this is how I've taken that and translated that into what we're doing.
Interesting. And do you find? I guess one of the things which I think about is the breaking down of language, and I talk about this quite a lot. And I think you can find yourself in a real knot with language because it what it means to you is very different to what it means, and big words mean different things. And there's something around the art of being able to break down into the layman language. There's an art around simplifying things, not oversimplifying it where it loses its value, but being able to, a bit like you did with the brownie analogy, like
Hmm.
really turn that into human language and go, I get it. And I think when we think about this and how we help people on that journey, that's a skill what I still have yet to see people really master, because maybe it's a book thing. I don't know. What's your take on it?
Well, don't forget, what I do is I help them to do this. I don't do it myself. So I'm not trying to give them something, impose something. I'm actually saying, right, let's go and listen to demand on the headsets now. It's like, okay, yeah, we can do that. There's a whole load of fancy words I could use behind that. Um, so every now and then I will pop up with a word that like value, purpose. So we're going to define those. We're going to go into those. So there are some words I use, but the first 3 years that when I started doing this, I used to take words from systems thinking and complexity, and they would kind of like write them down and, yeah, okay, what does that mean again? Like have this list of definitions. And then when I finished working with them, I'd say, okay, so that was really good, but what are some of the things I could have done differently? And they'd always say, all these bloody words. Why can't you just use something that's more straightforward? And I go, okay. So next time, right, I stripped out all those words and I just used basic, straightforward English. And two things happened. They didn't complain at the end. And secondly, they understood it in a more straightforward way. And then when they used words with their colleagues, they used whatever words came to mind for them that worked for them. And I didn't bother with that. It didn't worry me. It's just
Mm,
it's the concepts, not the words.
yeah. I think you picked something quite nice there around the ease of being able to allow it to transfer as well,
Mm.
like pass from one to the other. I
Well,
get
what happens, Danny, is that once I've done this with a team, there's normally one person at least in the team who is really keen, and then they go on to do it on another service. But
nice.
they lead on the other service, and I kind of help them a little bit, and that's it. Then they can do what I do.
That's brilliant. So I want to talk about some of your so you do you do webinars. I think I was looking at one of your courses a few years back, I think. But yeah, tell us a little bit about what the course looks like. I guess if you've got someone like a young professional and but you're offering some of your workshops or whatever, like what can they expect? Obviously don't give away your secret sauce, but like yeah, what can they expect?
Well, what they get with me the first day is they get a case study. I'll go right. We're going to go through what it's like to be a member of this team.
Oh,
What do they do on day one? What do they do on day two? What do they learn? What do they get confused about? What surprised them? And I have videos and I have examples from the team. We can see what they've written. They can go, wow, at this point they were really surprised. So I go through a real case study. It takes a while, but that's what we go through. And at the end of that, they've understood that this is very different, and they've understood the the new method.
mm,
And that's how we then start off. The second thing we do then is we talk about what we know about complexity and applying complexity to our organizations. And complexity is easy because we all know what complexity is. We just don't recognize it because we use a word called complexity. And when we Google it, we find, oh, that's a difficult description. And what is it? It's like, and you search for these definitions. And I've talked to people who go, I've struggled with complexity for 2 years. What is it, John? And they're like aggressive.
mm,
And I go, okay, what happened when you finished school and you wanted to get a job? Did you know what job you were getting? What did you do? Oh, I didn't know. No, I kind of, was with my parents for a bit. And then I did this job in a supermarket for a bit. And then I met someone at a party and, oh, they were working there and they gave me this job. That's what complexity is. It means that you don't know what's going to happen next and you can't control the situation. So what you do is you immerse yourself in there and you figure out what's the best way to get the job that you want, even though you don't know what it is. We know what complexity is. We live with it every day. It's our lives. So it's kind of showing people that that's if they had that mindset when they went into an organization instead of this logical mindset, they would look at things differently. So that's what I kind of do with people is I get them comfortable pushing past the boundaries that they currently have. And a lot of their boundaries are things like, how do I apply digital to this? How do I apply logic? How do I analyze this? Don't analyze it. Just look at it and tell me what you think. Experience it and then reflect back to the rest of the team what you've just experienced. Don't look at the data. Don't look at the numbers. Just experience. And then they learn sense making. It's kind of easy if
mm.
you do it that way. And when they come out of it, they go, oh my God, my head is full of stuff. And I now need to apply that to the work I'm doing. And it kind of settles down. I help them a little bit afterwards. Maybe we have conversations and they start to apply some of these new things.
Nice, nice. Um, I guess I will be mindful of your time, mate, John. But I guess I want to go full circle. So I asked you a question earlier, which was, "What's the one thing?" I think it was question 7. I think you picked, which was ultimately, "What's the most difficult thing you've ever had to apologize for?" And take this professionally, personally, whatever. What comes to mind for you on that?
I think when I first started and I was like a young manager, and this is actually very indicative of how we think about organizations and how they work. So as soon as I became a young manager, I behaved as though I was a manager, right? Now, no one gave me a book or a list to say, this is how a manager behaves. I knew it already. So, what I used to do is I go around telling people what to do. And if there was a problem, I would fix it. And if some people weren't pulling their weight, I would let it be known to them that they're not doing the right thing. So, I kind of look back at that time and those people, and I want to apologize to them. Because what I know now is that's exactly the opposite way of how I could have worked. That way of working makes their job uncomfortable. It makes them uncomfortable in a job. It makes them just like feel like a cog in a wheel. They feel out of control. They feel that I'm not listening to them as individuals. And yeah, that kind of did happen for a short time. And I was trying to be that manager.
Mm,
Yeah. Because that's what I thought I needed to be as a manager. And that was what would promote me to
mm.
be a manager with a bigger salary, because that's the mindset that you go into in a traditional organization. So I want to apologize to all those people that I work with then, and luckily I'm not like that anymore.
It's a fascinating one. I think, I mean, you always win in hindsight, right? Like always. But I think you've picked up a really good point, which is, this is ultimately one of the key drivers of Peter principle, right? We go up, 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 and we stop at a level, and we're like, oh, why have we got all this band around the business? Um, so I asked you earlier, I was like, actually, when you was a child, what do you want to be? And you talked about engineering and stuff. If I was to ask you right now, as you've mentioned throughout, you're continually learning, you're continually developing. What do you want to be when you grow older, John? What would you say now?
What do I want to be when I grow older? I don't know what I am now, so how on earth can I answer that question? If you ask me now, what do I do? I try to give you a description of all the things I do, but what do I do? I kind of change my title on LinkedIn every 6 months.
I love that.
So sometimes it's a designer of services, sometimes it's redesign work. I don't know. I just want to keep doing. I don't want to do anything any different. I'm no way. I mean, if I can do more of this, that's what I want to do.
Nice. Nice. Um, where can people follow you? Where can people book onto the courses? Where can people keep up to date with what you're sharing and stuff, John? Where's the best place to go?
Well, my organization that I have created is called Impro, IMPRO. So if you just Google my name with Impro, or just Google my name, connect with me on LinkedIn, that would be great, because I love to connect with people that are kind of like-minded, where we can share and learn from each other. So do that. I've got my workshops on there. Um, a lot of case studies, a lot of things to help people. I'm now starting to add very poorly recorded videos, which I need to sort out. So I'm kind of trying to use different ways to kind of help people to do what happened to me when I was younger. Like, people helped me to uncover things I couldn't see. And I
Mm,
remember those. I remember some of the moments, that's what I want to do for other people. So that's kind of what I'm doing. So yeah, please connect with me that way.
awesome. Awesome. John, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Fantastic. It's been really interesting to talk like this. It's really good to have conversations with you about that kind of stuff. And yeah, really good.